Welcome to our brief lecture on culture in the classroom, in which I'll talk a little bit about my experience as a K-12 ESOL teacher and how I envisioned culture, and I'll give you some tips on how to consider culture in the teaching of emergent bilingual students. It's good to start with what culture is not. Culture isn't holidays, heroes, and food. That's only surface culture. Culture is much deeper than that. Culture is viewed by Sonia Nieto in her 1992 book as the ever-changing values, traditions, social and political relationships, and worldview created, shared, and transformed by a group of people bound together by a combination of factors that include a common history, geographic location, language, social class, and religion. So while things like holidays, heroes, and food are certainly part of culture, they are only the surface of culture. It's much deeper than that. We're talking about things related to race, ethnicity, language, social class, gender, sexual orientation, and other circumstances related to identity and experience. That's how Sonia discusses it in her 2017 text. Culture is not a month, and it cannot just be defined by a particular 31 days, although sometimes cultures are celebrated in a particular month. It's much deeper than that as well. And culture is not separate from language. You can't take culture out of language, although some people have tried in their teaching of that. No, culture is deeply ingrained in our way of thinking, and language is part of our way of thinking, and you can't separate the two. The first thing I find, the first recommendation I would give to new teachers if you're going to explore culture is to know yourself. Understand that you are you have a culture. Everyone does, and they participate in one or more cultures. Okay, so if we're part of a dominant culture, there has been a tendency to exoticize or other those people who are, those students rather, who are not part of the dominant culture. So we celebrate them, and we celebrate the diversity, but we don't consider our own participation in particular cultures. So always know yourself and know that you are part of a culture or multiple cultures. Then you have to think about how to recognize and know your students' cultures. So some principles and practices for that are some really practical things you can do in your classroom. You can survey, ask certain questions about what the students know and what they're thinking before you start a unit. You can have lots of discussions about scenario prompts, controversial issues, things that are happening in the school, things that are happening in the community, and get their opinions and thoughts about what's going on, so you can really listen deeply to your students' concerns, so you can start to understand their worldview and their way of thinking, so you can know more about their culture, the way things are done at their homes, in their homes. You can invite families to class. Parents should always be welcome in your class for one way or the other. It's not always easy to get parents to involve because they're working and they have different schedules, but if given enough time, students will enjoy having their parents as part of classes, and families will make an opportunity to come to class. Take part in students' lives as best you can. There are going to be opportunities outside of the class in which you're going to be invited to religious ceremonies, first communions, confirmations, baseball games, and such. Never say no to taking part in students' lives outside of the classroom. It's a great way to get to know your students, know their cultures, and know what's important in their lives. And last, avoid labels, groups, right? We sometimes tend to think of groups, especially linguistic communities, as monolithic. For example, we may think of all Spanish students as Spanish-speaking students as being one and the same. Of course, the culture of Puerto Rico is much different than the culture of Colombia and Argentina and in Spain, etc., etc., etc. So avoiding those labels. And also you want to seek intersectionalities. Intersectionalities is academic speak for being part of multiple cultural groups, right? It's not just by race and ethnicity, but there may be people who are African American and LGBT, white and socioeconomic, lower socioeconomic classes. So multiple cultural groups can overlap. People participate in a number of cultures, not just one. So how do we create space to draw on, how do we create space to support our students by drawing on what they know about culture? One practice is translanguaging, and translanguaging, well, it's a term that's been around for about 30 years. It comes from Wales originally, but in our discussion of bilingualism, biliteracy, and ESOL matters, translanguaging is mostly considered to be the multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of their bilingual worlds. And that's Ophelia Garcia's 2009 definition of that. So basically, it's all of the linguistic and cultural resources that students use in order to make meaning. They're not coming to your classroom with a blank slate. They're coming with multiple ways of making meaning in their first languages and their second languages. They understand genres. They have different literacy practices that they may be coming with, and so they're coming to your classroom with that linguistic repertoire, and you're going to have to think about how you can create space in your classroom to draw upon that. I'm going to show you a brief example of what translanguaging looks like in a math classroom in which a teacher, Andy Brown, uses the different linguistic resources of his Polish-speaking and Spanish-speaking students in a math lesson. It's about 4 minutes long.
Up on the board, I wasn't sure if that was correct. Sharon helped me with that yesterday. Sharon, what does number 1 say on remember? Trabajando al revés, correct? Work backwards? Does everyone agree with that? The lesson that followed it, I try and make sure whatever the word problem is, I have to adapt it for the Spanish speakers and the Polish speakers, because some of the language in the problem that's written in English, it's hard for them to understand. Even for the kids who only speak English, the problem is just as difficult for them as well. So the translanguaging really helps them not only get motivated, but also to understand the concept behind the problem. Hay dos problemas, ¿sí? Okay, the first one, Oscar, could you read your problem? Wait, louder, slower. Good. I like to put the kids' names in the problem, so I'll change that around, but when you are translanguaging, it's good to save everything, so you don't have to do everything over and over again, so that helps too. Tiff, do you want to give it a shot, or want to try? Okay. Now, Tiffany's mom speaks Polish, and Tiffany is learning Polish. Go ahead, Tiff. Nice and loud. Okay, now, did that make sense to you, some of it? Some of it, okay. So, since I don't speak Polish, Matthew usually helps me with the, what do you call that thing? iPad. Okay, yeah, translate, okay? Thank you, good try. 8 por 2 es 16, entonces 5 por 2, 10. Joan, tienes 1 y 10, 16? There were 2 problems. They had to, it's a strategy that we have in Go Math called working backwards, where basically, it's almost like an algebra problem where if I said, a basic example would be like 5 plus 3 plus x equals 10. So it's 5 plus 3 is 8, plus x would be 2 equals 10. But this is with mixed numbers. So it's much more difficult, and they basically had to take 2 fractions, mixed numbers, with unlike denominators, add them, find a common denominator, simplify it, and then subtract it from another mixed number. which is a lot even for a student who is English proficient. Ice sculpture. I forgot how to say it again. Melissa, how do you say it? How do you say ice sculpture again? I want to not look at it. Escultordeo. Remember, when you're making your own problem with your partner, remember, you want to make it so they already give you the total of something and you have to find the missing piece. Okay, so you're working what? Okay, just keep that in mind, okay?